Hello, now it's Susie Miller on Best Way to Change the World, where I do interviews with a very wide range of talented and interesting people who are all doing things in the world for reasons that to them really matter. I'm now going to introduce you to Dallas Simpson, who is a binaural audio artist. So actually, to start with, Dallas, I'd love to know what got you working with binaural, because it's still something that a lot of people haven't even heard of.
Okay, well, it goes back quite a few years. I started tape recording when I was a youth with old reel-to-reel tape recorders, which were very clunky. Most of the ones that I could afford were very second-hand, and some worked really well, most of them didn't. But I got into electronics and started recording, and that was music. I was recording off the radio, sometimes with a microphone, but mainly just a way of collecting music and that sort of thing. And then as time went on, because my mother, bless her, she's passed away a while ago, was a wonderful instructor of nature and the countryside. And she would go out on these walks, and I can't remember exactly how it came about, but she used to take pictures, and when we used to go together, she would give me this amazing running commentary of what she was seeing and feeling and experiencing. And I said, well, you must record this, Peggy, that's my mother's name. So I gave her a little cassette recorder, just mono cassette recorder. And once she got used to operating it, which took a few trial and error, but she went off and did these incredible kind of emotional monologues of her experiences of everything, of the location, the trees, the insects, the falling leaves, the grass moving, the bark, the flowers, the birds. And it struck me because obviously I'm very close to my mother, and I wanted to do something similar. And I because then you could get more sophisticated recorders, but I actually started with a little kind of Walkman type cassette recorder, and I went out and I tried to do these commentaries, and it just wasn't working. I couldn't do it. She had a unique gift, and I thought, well, okay, let's try and do it without the commentary, or very little commentary. And so I tried to do this, and in mono, and I thought, well, this is all very well, but it doesn't really capture what I'm perceiving, what I'm hearing, the full surround experience, the spatial movement of water down the stream, the rustling of the leaves as the wind blows about spatially, and the tree canopy and the rustle of animals, birds, whatever it is. So I then went to stereo, and yeah, this is good and it works great on speakers, but on headphones, it's all kind of inside your head. And I thought, well, yeah, this is okay, the quality's great, but I'm still not getting that direct experience, that record of what I'm hearing. Then I discovered binaural. I thought, oh, that looks interesting, I must look into that. And of course, the early binaural recordings were done using a mannequin or a dummy head. So they had a physical model of a human head, or a rough approximation of a human head, like the Neumann head and so on, with the microphones in the ears and the pinny on the side. And that was okay, but very, very expensive. And the mannequin, forget it, way beyond my price range. So I thought, well, there must be a cheaper way of doing this. So I thought, well, hang on a minute. Suppose I actually fit tiny microphones inside my ears. Let's give it a go. Well, I was sort of an impoverished student, and initially, and then I was sort of doing various jobs and things. Didn't have a vast amount of money. Got married in 1978, and I thought, well, I do a bit of electronics, maybe I can make some microphones. So at that time there was an electronics store on the high street called Maplin, and they sold all kinds of bits, components, resistors, capacitors, and tiny electret miniature condenser microphones for a couple of quid each, a couple of pounds each. So I thought, now we're talking. Let's try these. So I got 2 or 3 of them and wired it up and created a circuit and put them in my ears and recorded, and I was completely blown away. I thought, yeah, now I'm hearing back what I'm actually hearing in my normal perception of the world around me. And so that became my default system of binaural recording with ears, sampling my own hearing. Now, unfortunately, the electret mics from Maplin were very unreliable. I had to overrun them to get the headroom, because if you just ran them in the normal circuit configuration, they were very sensitive, but they had very little dynamic range. So if you're recording on a high street and a lorry or a bus went past, the whole thing would blow out and become overloaded, which is not really what I wanted. So I saved up and I thought, right, I need some good mics. And people were talking about the sound devices, not sound, it's the recorder, the DPA 4060s, which are tiny lavalier mics, very high quality. Can't remember who makes them now, it'll come to me. And so I bought a couple of these and they just blew me away. And so ever since, I was using those microphones, which I modified to fit my ears. It's quite an intriguing little modification. And so that's what I did. So I used these DPA microphones, Danish Pro Audio 4060s, in my ears, custom modified, initially into a cassette recorder, which wasn't quite good enough on the phase relation between the channels. Switched to digital, that's it, we've got a system. And so I've been recording using that technique since the mid 90s, really, about 95, 96. And I've always used that system. Now, what I wanted to do was to create these soundscapes from the perspective of someone engaging with the soundscape. And my art went through a number of different phases. But initially, I wanted to, I'll give you a shortened version because otherwise it gets really boring. But I wanted to explore this concept of a silent world which, with some interaction, produces sound. For example, if the wind blows in the trees, there's an interaction between the wind and the trees and it creates sound. The water trickling, water in the container is silent, but when it flows and when it goes through a certain conformation of the ground, the soil, the rocks, then that turbulence gives rise to the sound. But where was the human art in that? And I wanted to be an instrument that would elicit sounds that are specific to a particular environment. And so I developed this idea of environmental performance, where I interacted with the environment itself by touching, scraping, tapping, whatever. And that physical interaction would excite the elements of the environment into vibration, which would be heard as sound. And the challenge, one of the challenges here was to assess the environment, because urban environments, concrete jungles, bricks, walls, tarmac, it's very robust. So you can be a bit more brutal and you can throw stones around and you can go for it. And you're not damaging the environment, you're just making the sounds, and the acoustic of the space gives rise to all kinds of simple and complex echoes. And all of that creates this dialogue between the artist and the environment. And then I thought, well, this is fine, but what about the soundscape of the countryside, the forest, the woodland? And I was caught between two phases here, because the sounds of nature are sublime and beautiful on their own. And nobody would deny that, and I certainly couldn't deny that. So that had to be experienced and recorded. But I also wanted to make my presence felt to the environment, and in a communion, as an embrace of the environment through touch, through contact. I mean, the obvious one that we all do and know is footsteps. And the footsteps themselves will produce all kinds of echoes and acoustics according to what the environment is when you're in it, and so on and so on. But and I also used to look out for things that I could make sounds with. And I made a mistake. When I started doing this, I found myself tapping out rhythms and music. And when I listened to it, I thought what I was hearing was the music rather than the environment. And so I had to rethink, and I thought, now this has to be, the word I used before, a caress. It's no good going out trying to play the instrument the environment as an instrument, because then it becomes music, and we interpret music in a particular aesthetic way. So that destroys the perception of a sounded environment, and allowing the environment to speak through humble and respectful actions, which is what I wanted to convey. So then I went through a whole series of trying to work that concept through in different environments, some robust environments. There's a series that I made in the early days, 95, 96, called the Stone Vandal Suite, and that involved going to bridges, like bridges over railway lines, tunnels, even at one point a large concrete pipe, and throwing stones and larger bricks and making quite loud sounds which excited the environment because it was robust. And you can do that. Okay, there's a few scratch marks and a few other marks, but it's a robust environment. In the countryside, in the world of nature, which is just so sublime, I can't describe it more than being it's totally sublime. You can't do that. And you have to make that decision. You have to consciously assess what the limit of your activity is. And that process of restraint, of evaluation, was a maturation process of me, the artist, responding to and being affected by the environment. So the plan was to try in sound, through my own perception, to communicate those layers through sound works. And then you can start to go into more complex nuances. But in essence, that's how my art evolved. And that's what I tried to do as a sound artist. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
That's a really lovely description. And what I really want to know is, you've described very well how you would deal with the more robust environments, but these more subtle environments in nature. In practice, could you give us give me some examples of what you actually did and what you created?
Right. So there's, in some cases, the interactions were absolutely minimal. It's like a sanctuary, a sacred sanctuary, that you are searching for that, to borrow a term from photography, a decisive moment when a sound presents it, or the potentiality of a sound presents itself. And there's one piece with the rather enigmatic title of On Hearing the First Note of Willow in Spring. And that involved going down the River Trent, because I live near Nottingham. And there's some willow groves at the side of the river. And I walked through, and on occasions caressing very gently, very delicately caressing the bark of the willow tree. And then I moved through, and at a particular point, I found a stump of a branch or a twig that had been broken off. And by plucking that it would produce a rather dull note. And that was the note I discovered. So the work was with great humility and love going into this environment to commune with that environment and to try and find those simple single little moments that offered the potentiality of a sound that could be elicited through human interaction, in this case me. But there's another layer to this. It's not just about the sound art, it's not about the sound recording. Ultimately, it's about the relationship that we have with the planet. Because, you know, we know now that humanity, for whatever reasons, are destroying the planet. And that can only happen if people are totally disconnected with it. They see it as an objectified matter, rather than the planet that sustains us, that we can only exist if this beautiful planet is allowed to flourish in the way where all the life and the weather systems and everything has a beauty and a sustainability. And if we disturb that equilibrium, if we mess it up, we do so at our own peril. And that's basically where we seem to be now. So I wanted to develop a system of art, an art form that encouraged everybody as individuals to form that healing relationship with the planet. And in my case, it was through sound and through looking and listening for the voice of the planet, through eliciting these sounds. I call it actualizing the silent potentialities of nature into sound. And so that's kind of another layer within the art form that I practice. I hope that's helpful.
That's lovely. This is not very scientific, but I was drawn to binaural because it feels different. And I wanted you to, someone listening to this might go, why doesn't he use ambisonic surround sound, for his recordings? What's the point of binaural, other than, it's got to be ending up into, in two different ears at the end of the day. So it might be that, I know some people say you should do the whole thing in ambisonic and then mix down to binaural, which I can understand if you're doing a soundscape. But if you're doing actors performing and there's movement and people coming forwards and backwards, would not binaural recording be the better option? Could you say a little bit about that, and also how binaural relates to the work you've been doing as well?
Okay, binaural can be understood in different ways. The way that you first described about creating a multi-channel recording from an ambisonic mic, which I used to have a sound-filled mic, and yes, I know about ambisonic recording, B format and all of that. The thing about that is that it's a scientific method using 4 capsules in a three-dimensional pyramid. And the axes, the structure of the pyramid, the points of the pyramid are used as reference points to capture sound focused on a point in the middle of an imaginary sphere. And so the sound, the full three-dimensional sound, is captured in that form. And it is possible to scientifically extract channels that can be rendered into a speaker sphere or 5.1 surround format or any other format by various forms of processing. And that's great in production for theatres and cinemas, where you have a speaker replay and people can sit within the zone of the listening zone of the speakers, and it works, and it's a very, very good way of doing it. But I'm interested in human perception. Human perception is radically different and is based on our ears, our body, our head shape, and that intimate relationship of the interaction of our physical presence, a whole body, head, ear presence in the environment. And we're all slightly different. And that is what I really wanted to capture. Now, in drama, you have the option, of course, of wiring all your actors with binaural mics and a radio link, or however you want to do it. And then the audience would be wearing headphones, and you can obviously mix between the different actors' ear microphones and give them the perspective from the actor who is talking, or however the producer and the director wish to convey the aesthetic of the drama or the experience of whatever it is. Now, that is what I'm interested in, but I'm not a dramatist, I'm not an actor, so I haven't really gone into that because it's not something that I have any knowledge of. But as a technique, absolutely. I mean, I have done work with people wired up for binaural as a sort of art form, sometimes just me wired up, and sometimes with dummy heads, and interacted with sort of dummy head, rather crude dummy heads. But it was all a bit limiting, and I didn't have the time to explore it, and it involved other people, and I tend to work on my own because I'm a bit like that. So yes, the potential for binaural in drama is incredible, but it's never, no, it's not that it's never been fully explored, but I think the exploration of that is quite minimal at the moment. There's a tendency to see binaural as just a way of conveying a kind of three-dimensional sound to headphones, because a lot of people are listening on headphones with their handheld devices and so on. And the experience that you get from that is very much a mix, rather than an actual presentation of one's hearing being there at the location. Obviously, if it's done well, it can be quite convincing. One of the things that is more challenging is below the head sounds. The problem with below the head sounds is ground reflections. Now, if you're working in a room, you get quite strong ground reflections. You've got to have it very heavily carpeted, but then you've still got the wall reflections. Ideally, an anechoic chamber. But of course, that is totally dead. And whilst you might get wonderful spatial binaurals by whatever means, it's a dead environment. And we don't live in a dead acoustic environment. We live in a world that's full of all kinds of reflections and nuances and echoes and so on and so on. So there's, I'm going to ask you to come back for a question, but I hope that I've perhaps put over some ideas, concepts, perceptions relevant to what you're asking.
That's interesting because my first binaural headset, the Sennheiser binaural headsets, which are great for sound around, but not great for interviewing people, I discovered, because you're getting so much of the background. So I then got a blissfully affordable, thank goodness, Zoom HR, and then looking at that from a drama point of view of rather than of choosing the perspective of whose perspective you're telling the story from at that particular point, rather than just having lots of different people's perspectives, which doesn't mean it's the right way, but trying to find a kind of a good way of working, really. And then working with the director who can get the performances, who will put their own input in, but I need to do this homework with the sound recorders first because the director has never used binaural before. So we need to be able to say, if you can get the sense of distance, but choosing which perspective you do. For one example is, I did a test run of a cat up a tree, and the character arrives and you could hear the cat, and it's supposed to be the cat's a bit far away, and the cat was pre-recorded but then re-recorded outside in a tree with the actor as part of the test, and which works surprisingly well actually, because otherwise if you just stick it on afterwards, it just sounds like it's in a studio, so that's not going to work. But listening to it was hard just by having the cat being closer to get a sense of the actor climbing the tree. So we're going to flip that round now and do the cat's perspective. So you've got the actor making a noise further down, clambering up, the voice getting louder. And in a way, part of me thinks, well, what's the difference? But actually, it's just easier to get as a listener. So there's a lot of just what is a listener going to understand most quickly when all they've got is audio. But I was very interested in what you said about footsteps. So when I'm trying to describe binaural to people, you've got footsteps coming towards you. In, to me, stereo, it just sounds like they've just got louder. But when it's in binaural, it's like they are actually coming towards you. And it's not just that, oh, that feels real. There's a physical reaction to that. That's what I'm interested in, and how to use that appropriately in the way drama is recorded. Because at the end of the day with a drama, you want people to feel things. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on using binaural in that way.
But you see, this is most fascinating because, as I say, I don't work in drama, so I'm coming at it from, as you obviously can hear from what I'm saying, very different perspective. Yes, the thing about footsteps is, well, it's obvious when you say it, but every locality, the acoustics are different. And so I'm just thinking of footsteps over grass in the open. Then you've got the echoey footsteps under a bridge, and also the movement that the footsteps make around the listener, behind the listener. If people are walking over a footwalk that's high up, or someone's at the top of some steps and the footsteps are down below, all of that is something that perceptually is interesting and defines a specific spatial choreography, as I call it, that you want to convey in the ears of the listener. And that's obviously, it has to be appropriate for the dramatization, but realizing that in binaural, I think the only way that I would consider doing it would have to be on location. I wouldn't want to be working in a studio or a room or anything like that. It's got to be done on location. The weak points of binaural are centre front, and that is because of our bilateral symmetry. Where if you put a mirror down the centre line of our body, the reflection looks like a person because we're similar. And in binaural, we tend to find that the sounds that are central to our perception, on the line of our nose, down the centre line of our body, our ears are very susceptible to our own confirmation. And if it's not the same as the recording, then you often get flipping from front to rear, front-rear reversal. And this was quite a problem with dummy heads, and I don't know if it still is. Maybe they've corrected that now with special processing. But the problem with dummy heads, and even in-ear recording, because of people's different head-ear conformations, shapes of their heads and ears are different. If you have a sound central, get my hand right on the screen, I can't do it, I'm working back to front. But you know what I mean. If you've got a sound central directly in front of you, it's fine for people who've got a head-ear conformation similar to mine. But if somebody hasn't, then the brain seems to flip the sound behind. And that's interesting, but probably not what you want in a dramatization. And I think there's probably a survival reason for that if we can't determine where a sound is coming from, look behind you, So it's probably a survival adaptation, but it's something that has to be borne in mind when you're recording. So I try and place important sounds off centre. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but because of the theatre stage presentation of things and the announcer sitting in front with the microphone or the presenter, there is a tendency to place important things centre front. And on stereo and even surround sound, you can do that. and that's absolutely fine. It works perfectly. In binaural, that's not the case. So if you want strong spatial images that translate into the ears of people who have a different conformation, you need to concentrate on the sides in particular. The sides are the strongest because it represents the maximum differentiation, well, left and right. And our ears are very good, very stable, irrespective of what our head ear conformation is, of detecting the sounds around the sides, but very weak with centre front. So that spatial knowledge, I would think, is probably quite important in dramatisation, because you want to present the strongest possible image. Also, creatively, it gives lots of interesting opportunities for the spatial choreography in a binaural production. Is that helpful?
I think that's actually essential information because from a director's point of view, to focus at least, say, I would say 45 degrees off either side, and behind is also very, very effective. So we're allowing much more than you would normally have for a radio drama time to block and work with the actors. And of course, as we were saying earlier, footsteps, if those footsteps are really loud, because you're not using lapel mics, you've got a mic that's picking up all the background. So choreographing the movement of the actors around the sound is really quite enough almost to make people wonder why I'm bothering, because it's so much hassle. But moving into so that was really, really helpful. With the microphones themselves, obviously I can't afford the Newman head. There is the 3DO, which has ears attached to it. Looks like a funny little thing. That works really well. And then less expensive still is the Zoom HR, which does ambisonic and binaural and doesn't have a head. And I'm assuming it uses some kind of algorithm, would you say, to because it's really effective.
Well, I've not heard it. I tend to do my own thing, so it's in ears and that off we go, you know. But I know these other systems exist. It's a question of whatever works. If you find that you have a piece of technology and it gives you what you're looking for, use it. It's as simple as that. I mean, you know, we've got to be practical about it. And I'm sure that there's a place for in-ear work. There's a place for the various forms of dummy head and mix and match. So horses for courses, whatever works, use it. I'm not an expert on the various dummy heads because I've not really used them. So I can't really comment any further on that.
But yeah, what you're saying about the positioning is so key. But one of the things that I've had some people suggest is don't bother with all these mics. Just in Logic Pro, you can create binaural panning. So as I understand it, you record mono in different positions, and then you do all this binaural panning in post, which would be great if I was a sound mixer by trade. But I'm imagining that might be great for the BBC, because I believe that's something that they do. And that's understandable. They've got all those facilities and all of those mixers. But I'm also wondering about these authenticity of that. You know, as you were saying earlier, even with stereo drama, if you want it to sound authentic and the characters are outside or in a large building, you don't try and do that in a studio and knob twiddle to fix it. It just doesn't work really. It's not worth the effort. Just go onto location. Do you think it's too romantic an ideal to say that, well, no, we should go through all these difficulties of recording with binaural mics to get that authenticity, or actually really we probably could just do it in the studio afterwards?
Well, as somebody who always works in the environment, I'd say you've got to do it in the environment. But of course, I can imagine that budget limitations and all kinds of other factors may require that some dramas or some binaural productions would be done, if you like, synthetically, for whatever reason. But it's like any art form. There's a whole range of diversities of creativity within a genre, and for me, it's pure binaural or nothing. But for other people, you cut your cloth according to what it is that you're doing, what sits creatively and aesthetically with the concepts that you're working with, and so on and so on, and the budget, of course. So I don't think there's any hard and fast rule. It's up to the team that's making the work to perhaps consult, or if not consult, for the director, producer to share a vision with the actors or the participants, and bring them all on board as to how we're doing it this way because. And here's a few examples of what can be done using this technique, and then everybody becomes part of that learning process of how to use and convey the aesthetic to the listening audience, and that's all. That's a musical thing. That's a community thing, and to develop the music and community of performance is a wonderful thing in itself. And so, yeah, go for it.
And just to add on to that, you as a creator, it's binaural or nothing, but would you ever consider taking, not recording binaurally, recording in mono, and then playing around in a studio? And if not, why would you not do that? Or is there any occasion where you might do that?
Last weekend, I was at the Nottingham Green Festival, which is a wonderful event. And it was on the 10th of September. And there's a bit of history to it. But 10 years ago, I had my cassette recorder and a mono mic, went to the Green Festival and went round recording people's opinions and feelings about what they thought of the Green Festival. They're doing the 30th anniversary. And I thought, well, they said to me, could you do the same? And because now I always record binaurally, of course I did that. But I also had a handheld mic. So I went round recording binaurally, but also a mono handheld mic to combine the two different processes, or to have a record of the two different processes, one reflecting what I was doing 30 years ago and the other one where I am now. So things can be combined. Now, the thing that scuppered me, there's always something. The thing that scuppered me was due to the fact that my microphones were old and it was very humid. I had all kinds of microphone breakup and technical problems, and it was a bit of a nightmare. So I ended up having to cross-cut between the mono microphone and binaural and half binaural, and sort of mixing and matching all these as the glitches appeared in different channels to get the full recording. I had to mix and match all these elements, and that actually created a most fascinating listen, because it was like a blending through time of different, recorded on the 10th of September 2023, but the techniques that I was recording by were a kind of a recapitulation of an old technique, the mono mic, and the binaural technique, and the vagaries of the environment and my equipment determined how that would fit together as a program. And it's also a case of making the best of what you've got. But it gave rise to a very interesting recording. So yes, I still occasionally use a mono mic interview style, but I also much more less now, but I still do binaural recording.
So am I right in thinking that, as I've heard, that trying to go between whether it's mono or stereo or to binaural and into cutting is very tricky if you're looking for a seamless experience. No, exactly. So what you've done is you've made something out of those differences, and for me that's very key with binaural, because it is, I do find it a bit messy, and yes, the backgrounds is you need to I'm searching for a very quiet field where there's a time of day where there's not too much bird song, and we're certainly not going to stand too near the trees, because it's like sticks onto that sound. And when I've had mixers kind of clear the sound up for me, they've got rid of all the binaural process of doing it, so it is messy. So I liken it, and do you think this is a fair analogy to, you can have a beautifully mastered digital copy of your favourite band, or you can go to the pub and listen to them play live, which is going to be messy. It's not going to be technically good, but I know which one I'd rather do. Do you think that's a fair a way to come at binaural? I mean, it has to have a certain quality to hear it through, if you're going to play it radio and get it broadcast, but it is, just accept that it is going to be a bit messy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Our hearing is messy. I mean, it's like the crowded room syndrome, when you're fighting to, and it gets worse as you get older, to listen to someone who's talking across the room. I mean, you shouldn't eavesdrop, but sometimes you do, or whatever sound it is. And you can't quite, especially when you get older, can't quite hear what they're saying. And you're trying to have a conversation with someone, and this thunderous vehicle runs past and you, sorry, can't hear what you're saying. This is part of life. Life is unexpected. Life throws all kinds of challenges at you. And that is a reality which to me makes it all exciting, because life is full of imperfections. Nature is full of imperfections, but that is the beauty of it. You look at the leaves on a tree, the flowers, they're broken, bits have fallen off, insects have eaten the leaves. It's messy, but that is the beauty of nature. And I think we have to move away from this kind of idealized perfection as being the quest, and encourage people to see the beauty in the imperfections as well, not just something that is perfect. And that's just my view, but that's how I feel about it.
Well, you've already had a big influence on me in this conversation, because that talking about that connection with nature and the listener really connecting with the sound, which is what's drawn me to binaural, and that's something I want to bring into audio drama, because I tend to listen to things. I'm sitting on the outside and I'm hearing this play going on, and it might be beautifully written and fantastically acted, but it's a bit like sitting in the cinema. The screen's still there, but when I first heard binaural drama, I was there. It was quite unnerving, and for me, that's something I want to create. From listening to you, what I hadn't thought about before is that you're outside. It's not just the characters and the actors and the story, but maybe to allow a little time for the listener to connect with that environment. The same way you would if you were looking on film, you have an establishing shot, you set the scene. Actually, that's a really important thing to do, isn't it, with the binaural, and to allow the listener time to feel like they're in this place and to connect with it before they get to it, which I hadn't put that in the script, but it's going in now.
Yeah, this is so true. I try and do that with a lot of my binaural works, because all of them have a walk in and a walk out. So a lot of times I'll have a location in mind that I want to move within and perform, but I have to access that location. And so all the works that I do will have a walk in some distance from the actual location, and I'll walk in and work through at a particular acoustic or whatever the space offers, and then at a certain point where I feel in tune, I'll start working with the environment and creating sounds or whatever, and that process of establishing a connection with the environment before you do anything, and just letting that gradually affect your whole being is vital for me. We tend to, and particularly pop music, it's all whoa, in your face, full volume. Life's not like that. And we have the ability to perceive an incredibly wide dynamic range of sound with our human hearing. And there is a beauty in silence and micro sounds, as well as having things a bit more full on, like a steam train going past or whatever, a thunderstorm, you know. But even in the thunderstorms, the tiny little drops from the guttering, from the trees, from wherever, and tiny little micro sounds embedded in that larger sound picture that give the detail and the dynamic, the spatial dynamics as well as sound dynamics. And in binaural, we're trying to convey both the three-dimensional space and the sounds within that space interacting and blending, or even in dissonance. It's difficult to describe in words, but maybe you get a feel of what I'm saying.
I do, and I think that one of the things I suspect that what I like about binaural, as opposed to just to ambisonic, yeah, you've got your 360, but in binaural, am I right in thinking you've also got much more about the height and depth? So there is a sense of depth and height, which is what makes you feel like you're pulled into it. A technical question here, which I am desperate for an answer to, and I'm really praying that you have the answer to here. When it rains, how do you record rain without getting the plattering sound of an umbrella or whatever it is? Because or literally, you know, God forbid you let the rain hit the mic, but how do you get a clean sound of rain? Because that's going to be probably our biggest practical problem.
Right. Good point. Never use an umbrella. But you see, the beauty about, if you're walking in the rain, how many times do you get a drop of rain in your ears, actually coming into your ears? If you've got a microphone in each ear, you're never going to have drops of rain on the microphone, and you're going to get the full perception of the rain falling around you. If you want to have an umbrella, you can do. If you want to have a hat with a brim, that will give you a different pattern. But if you want the pure perception of rain, in-ear binaural wins hands down. And I use that all the time, as I say, for the binaural recording. So that would be my recommendation for rain.
I can just imagine, say, to the director saying to the actors, well, if it rains, you have to, we're swapping, doing it all with the in-ear mics, or maybe someone could stand like over the microphone with the skirt that's not completely covering it, but we're naked, so there's not too much sound being created for the mic. So it's I'm joking obviously, but it is with the in-ear that would solve that problem potentially. With the Zoom mic or the DO there positioned, I don't know how to. It's like literally someone leaning over it, but not wearing a Macintosh, wearing something that doesn't make too much noise as the rain goes off their body. I can imagine us doing some strange consortions to just try and make it work.
Yeah, that is really difficult because your ear will pick up kind of blind sound spots, shadowing of sound with a physical presence and obstruction, if you like. And that will be noticeable. There's other things that I've done with binaural. For instance, wind. Now we all know that wind noise on microphones is not very pleasant and blows out the mics and they go off. So I did one of my techniques with wind is simply to find locations that are wind shielded by nature. So if you're in a valley, like a small valley, a wooded valley ideally, then the wind blows over the top. Or if you've got a lot of trees, like in a forest or a woodland, and the wind's blowing the canopy, but it's filtering out at ground level or near ground level, there'll be very little wind because it's filtered out by the woodland, the forest. And so a lot of that approach that I do is finding locations that give the acoustic protection against elements that would possibly interfere with the recording or blow the microphones out, or raindrops on the mic. In-ear gets rid of raindrops on the mic. Wind noise is still a problem, so you go to places where there is sheltering from the wind. A little bit of wind noise in the ear is realistic because that's what you hear. Unfortunately, it can be distracting, so you wouldn't want to be using wind noise all the time, but a little bit can give a sense of perceptual realism where it's appropriate, and all of that is part of the process of directorship, really, of what is the balance between the reality and the dramatization, and what elements can be incorporated and integrated into the drama without being distracting, but to convey that sense of realism. And that would be down to the director or the writer to make those calls, and then try it. And if it doesn't work, try something else until you get the aesthetic that you want. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful. And finally, what do you see are the sort of missed opportunities, if you like? Because my sense when I talk to professionals, I'm so happy to find a sound recordist who just wants to work with binaural and she thinks it's fantastic and exciting. But a lot of the others are like, why? Why do you want to do that? And there's quite a lot of existing professionals in the industry where it's not the standard mode of practice, and it can be messy and it has extra issues around it. So there's quite an understandable reluctance to engage with it. However, there are some very successful binaural dramas, mostly in the sort of vampire horror realm. And again, I don't know, I'm yet to discover how much of those are, I think quite a lot of it's still done in the studio afterwards. I feel there's a difference, but I can't prove it yet, but that's part of my journey. Do you feel that there is some real opportunities, not just with the use in audio drama, for binaural that people are missing out on? And what advice would you give to up and coming dramatists or creators of any kind, really, in the world of sound?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think it is, although it is known, perhaps not very well known in the general public, it's certainly known in sound recording circles, and it's often seen as a poor relation because there's a lot of uncontrollability. But I would say that now is the opportunity, particularly with so many people listening on handheld devices with headphones. This is what binaural requires: good quality headphones, good quality sound reproduction, and in-ear listening. So with all of that massive audience out there who are listening on headphones and high quality systems through the iPhones and various other phones, handheld devices, MP3 players, whatever, now is the time to really be developing all kinds of presentations with binaural, whether it's music, drama, news, it could be anything. But at the end of the day, it's how we hear. We hear binaurally. This is our natural form of hearing. So why don't we create recordings that present in the same way that we hear naturally? It seems very logical to me. It's only the historical development of recording from mono to stereo, and then mainly speaker surround sound, that trajectory of spatial presentation that has led to the norm being understood as a speaker presentation and mixing and so on and so on and so on. But in actual fact, as human beings, our natural mode of listening, of course, is binaural.
And Dallas, to end with, because I should have done this at the beginning, but I was just so keen to get stuck in. Could you, for anyone who's enjoyed listening to this, just tell them your name, how you would describe yourself and where they can find more of it. I can't wait to listen to to more of your work. So where do we go? And obviously I would ask you to send me links as well, because I can add them onto the video and audio podcast then as well.
Okay, well, I'm Dallas Simpson. I'm a location performance binaural sound artist. I've been doing this, well, I've been recording since I was a child. I've been doing binaural since the mid-90s. My work is difficult to find, but it's out there. And that was, I can give you links, of course. That was a deliberate decision on my part creatively, because in the same way that I go out to try and find locations and I have to search, and it requires quite a bit of effort to find, and the right time of day or night, and the weather when it's right. Equally, I would hope that listeners who wish to find my material would have to go through that process of search and discovery. If people want to know, they can communicate with me and I'll give them links. But if you type in my name, environmental location sound artist, or words in that realm, you'll pull out stuff. And I have stuff, material stuff, that's probably not a very good word, material in around the world. There's some in Russia, in America, Australia, UK, Europe. It's out there online in various places.
Thank you. I'm really going to enjoy that, and I love what you've just said, because I totally found you by accident, flailing around on Google on a bus on my phone, and you were making comments to a post that someone else had putting them right on a few things, and you clearly knew what you were talking about. And when you mentioned that you were an artist using binaural sound, I was so excited. It was like I discovered something out there and found you. So it clearly works as a technique.
I'm so grateful for you making contact, because it's so rare to find someone who is passionate about binaural as you obviously are. I hope we could stay in contact, and I would love to meet you sometime if it's possible.
I'd love to come up and visit you, and I'll definitely be keeping in touch and maybe running a few things past you to get your feedback, because your creative artistic perspective is really important, and it's important balance to help us create a drama that's not overladen with technical worries. As long as people can hear it and feel it, that's what I'm after, and hopefully the director is as well. Thank you so much, and I'll be speaking to you soon, I'm sure.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dallas.